Hello and welcome to the Zinger-Folkman webinar. Today we'll be talking about a topic that I think is going to be beneficial for everyone, and it's convincing executives how leadership development drives business success. And we think we've got some compelling data for you that will really help you in the process of convincing executives of this thing. So to start with, I'd like to introduce Jack Zenger. Jack is the co-founder of Zinger-Folkman. Jack.
Great to be with you.
And I'm Joe Folkman. And Maria Lickert, you are with us today also. Maria, you are the chat host. What would you like people to know about chat?
Thanks, Joe. Well, welcome everyone. Very excited to be here with you today. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat and I will respond to those. And any that I'm unable to get to, we'll be sure we get an answer to you afterwards.
Thanks, Maria. She answers all the hard questions. Jack and I will do the easy questions. Well, today's agenda, we're going to start by talking about the relationship of leadership effectiveness and organizational performance. This is not the first time we've mentioned this issue, this topic, right? We talk about this regularly, and we know that better leaders get you better results. We're going to show you and start by showing you some data around that. We're not going to give you too much because we have a ton of it, but that's our starting place. Next, we're going to talk about the 3 necessary ingredients for improved leadership effectiveness. And we've looked at some data, we've done some analysis, and we're going to share that with you. And then finally, the triple outcomes of developing leaders. And so what can you expect when you develop leaders and the effect it's going to have? So let me
Seeing your
talk.
screen, Joe, yeah.
Yeah, let me talk first about, a case that we did several years ago. This was the mortgage bank. And a long time ago, I used to work with 3 strategy consultants. And they'd always tell me, if you have a really good strategy, a monkey can run the business and be successful. And I would disagree with them. I said, I think leaders are critical. Well, here was a company, this mortgage lender. They had a great strategy. They had a winning strategy. They were going to be successful. But what we found is when we measured the leadership effectiveness of the branch leaders, and we looked at the worst leaders, those in the bottom 10%, we found that with that great strategy, they managed to lose 1.2 million. And the middle 80%, they made 2.4 million, but the top 10% made 4.5 million. And again, what we looked at here was the effect of really great leadership and the impact it had on profitability. In a study that we've done really over the years, and this is 104,000 leaders across the globe, what we're looking at here on the horizontal axis is leadership effectiveness. My guess is many of you have seen this study before, and the bars represent employee engagement. And the reality is, if you want to know whether a group of leaders are engaged or a group of direct reports are engaged and they love their job and they really are willing to work hard, the number one factor that you need to know is how effective is that leader. Because if you work for a terrible leader, then engagement is around the 22nd percentile. If you work for a good leader, it's around the 50th percentile. And if you work for a great leader, it's around the 80th percentile. There is an absolute clear correlation between the effectiveness of leaders and the engagement of employees. Now, these are 2 studies. We've done studies on profitability, on customer satisfaction, We've done studies comparing year-to-year sales in stores, and we've done studies on turnover and retention of employees, and over again, we've done all these studies, and we find in every one of them that the effectiveness of a leader is a critical element affecting whether a business is successful or not. Our motto, better leaders, better results. And we've proven that. And nobody disagrees with that. If you go to a company and say, would you like better leaders? Everyone says, well, sure, we would love better leaders. So how do you get them? And one way is to hire them. Good luck finding them. The other way is to take the leaders that you have and develop them. And we're going to focus on developing those leaders. So, Jack, talk about these necessary ingredients.
Yeah. So I see there was a question in the chat box about how do we measure leadership effectiveness. And so just as a way of informing everyone on the call, you'll hear us refer to 360-degree feedback, which consists of responses from, on average, about 14 people responding to a detailed questionnaire, about 60 questions, describing how a leader performs or behaves, and then being able to compare those results to worldwide databases and norms that tell you how this person or this leadership team compares. What I'm about to present to you is some information which I wish I had known 50 years ago. I wish I'd not only known it, but I wish I'd had the data to confirm it. I think I could have made a much bigger impact on the organizations that I consulted with and I worked with as in leadership positions. I think it would have made a huge difference. And so the three things that I'm going to be talking about are the three major components that we believe really make up a successful leadership development effort. They are using powerful learning methods. They involve including a number of people from the organization, a sufficiently large slice of the organization's leaders. And finally, it refers to the kind of the need for a sustained long-term development. Let me talk about each of those three in more detail. So let me begin with this slide on the powerful learning methods. What you can see there is that we think there are a number of them. It begins with, we think one of our favorites is 360-degree feedback. It's used by more than 85% of Fortune 500 organizations. And the reason why it gets used is because it really works. It really is an effective tool. Then the use of that information to help people create for themselves a powerful plan of development. We're big fans of business simulations. We think that they're a great tool to help people understand how their organization functions. And you can use them in a way that it brings out behavior, which then you can kind of provide feedback to each other about. We know that coaching can be a really powerful learning method. It's very personal. It's very specific. It's visceral. There are a number of specific skill building programs that are very valuable as learning methods, teaching people how to make better presentations, how to be better problem solvers. There's a whole variety of specific skill building activities. I suspect most on the call may be familiar with the notion of action learning, where a team of people in the organization is given the task of kind of analyzing a problem, coming up with alternative solutions, and then taking responsibility for the implementation of those solutions for the organization. So anyway, you see that there's a list of what we think are really powerful learning methods. And I suspect that you're probably all familiar with most of them, except maybe the last one. One of the things that our firm has done, we think, some kind of groundbreaking research on, is the notion of nonlinear development. And by this, we mean that when we analyzed important leadership competencies, we found that there were often some other behaviors that always went hand in hand with someone who was really good at that competency. And so we argued and we analyzed, if you could help people get good at those bank shots, those side doors, those alternative ways of getting better at something, can you help their overall leadership effectiveness? And our research showed that the answer was absolutely yes. And we've referred to that as nonlinear development. And we have data that shows what are those attendant behaviors that relate to the important differentiating competencies. So ingredient number one for a successful leadership development initiative is the use of powerful learning methods. Now, I would contrast those with some things that I've experienced, and I suspect many of you have too, which are less effective. I'm thinking of the number of lectures I've heard and presentations and talks. I've seen a lot of films. I've read hundreds, maybe thousands of articles, lots of books. These can be helpful in terms of giving people useful information, but in terms of really changing their behavior, they don't seem to have the same visceral, personal, engaging quality that some of that earlier list had. So we would argue that the more active a process can be, the more personal, more tailored to the individual, the more powerful it's going to be as a learning method.
Gosh, Jack, that's discouraging. We've written a lot of books and a lot of articles.
Ours have all been different. Yeah, right. Okay. The second element that we believe is really key to successful leadership development is the idea of involving a significant slice of the population. Now, the late Peter Drucker observed that often that meant for organizations that you had to reach at least a third to a half of the people in that group. And so Joe and I frankly kind of smile sometimes when we see organizations that are kind of behemoth or companies with thousands of managers, and they have a leadership development program that involves each year maybe 25 or 30 people, and they're very proud of that, and it certainly is better than doing nothing. But we kind of have to smile and say, do you really believe that if you kind of only involve 25 or 30 out of the many thousands, that you're going to really dramatically move the needle in terms of the improvement of overall leadership effectiveness in your organization? So without being too dogmatic or prescriptive, we're just saying that we believe the second important element of any successful leadership development initiative is you involve a major slice of that group. And the third thing we want to talk about is a sustained development over a multi-year period of time. We would argue that momentary bursts of activity do not have the same effect as continuity. And we're about to show you 3 case studies that demonstrate this cumulative positive outcome of sustained development. So Joe, carry on.
Let's talk about that, Jack. I'm always interested in some of our clients. We call them the one and done, right? they they get excited, they want to do leadership development, and they put leaders through the development experience, and they do it once. They do a 360 once. And as in college, I always wondered what would happen if a professor after the midterm said, I'm not going to give you a final. I just want you to study hard and embrace the things, and I'm not going to give you a final. Now, would you study? Uh, Today, I went to my cardiologist this morning, and it's what's interesting about it is you'd think, but you don't prepare for that. I mean, you want the cardiologist to tell you how you're doing, but I exercised on Monday and Tuesday. I watched what I ate for breakfast, and I have to admit my blood pressure was really good, 120 over 76. That's lower. That's great. But it's interesting because most of us are like that. And so as you think about these triple outcomes of developing leaders, one is that there's a measurable impact on participants' behavior. And that's what we find with 360. We find that with 360, people aren't aware of how they impact others, and giving them that 360 really brings them some insights about their behavior and how it's affecting others. Now, a lot of times I talk to leaders and they said, "Oh, well, I've done a 360." And I say, "Well, when did you do that?" And they said, "Well, 5 years ago." And I usually say, "Has anything changed over the last 5 years? Your direct reports, your job, the competition, everything's changed." And so in our firm, we have a precedence of every 2 to 3 years, we redo the 360 because things change. The second thing we're going to talk about is trickle down. And I love that phrase because it's such an interesting thing. It's something we measured, and we wrote an article about it. It went in the Harvard Business Review and was very popular. But there's this trickle down effect from leaders that go through leadership development. And the third thing is the effects of participants' improved behavior on all leaders in the organization. And we're going to demonstrate and show you that. So let's start with just the effect from a 360. Now, when we do a 360 kind of an assessment with managers, what we do is ask them to find one competency that they can improve and to work on that because we know the impact of just taking one competency and improving it. It's very significant. And this is a study we did where we looked at 4,216 leaders and we measured the percentage of those leaders that made a significant improvement in one behavior. And it was 85%. That's impressive, I have to admit. When you think about it, that 85% of the people that went through our 360 process and we asked them to improve, and again, they use this nonlinear development technique. We gave them the tools to do it, but 85% of them showed significant improvement. And I don't know, but it's hard to measure that level of improvement on most kind of training efforts. Jack, that's pretty impressive, don't you think?
Very, very impressive. And we've also seen data that overall, in terms of the overall level of effectiveness, we also see improvement. Not always 85%, but it's a very powerful process.
It is. And so in this study, we've got data on over 3,000 leaders where we're comparing their overall leadership effectiveness scores, which is the average of 60 behaviors. And what we found is we divided people into two groups. Leaders with fatal flaws. Okay, that was a very, very negative competency. There's something drastically wrong. And so we encourage them to sort of focus on that weakness. And the good news is that they were able to improve from an overall leadership effectiveness score in the 18th percentile to the 46th percentile. In other words, they went from kind of really bad to good at 46th percentile, 4 points below average. That's pretty good. Now, for leaders that were building strengths, and again, 80% of the leaders that we assess, we encourage them to not focus on their weaknesses, but to find a strength that they could build. And we think that's the best way for them to really accentuate their leadership effectiveness. And in fact, it looks like it works because they start off at the 55th percentile. And in 18 to 24 months, we find them at the 75th percentile. So we've seen significant change, significant improvements in their leadership effectiveness. So what's the effect of this and how does it occur and what happens here? Now, this is a study we did with 258 managers, and this is a little complicated. But let me explain the chart here. The horizontal axis shows you the effectiveness of managers, okay? The worst managers, bottom 10%. The best managers, top 10%. Now, the vertical bars, we're going to show you in a minute, they show you the effectiveness of the direct reports of the manager. Now, let me just say that if there's no effect, you'd expect an average score. In other words, if nothing's happening here, if having a bad leader doesn't affect you as a direct report of a bad leader, then we'd expect your score to be average. And most people say, well, if you have a bad manager, does that mean you're going to be a worse manager yourself? And people say, no, it doesn't affect me at all. Here's the data. The data shows that if your manager is the bottom 10%, your average effectiveness score as a manager is at the 29th percentile. And you can see what happens as those managers improve. And if you're in the top 10%, these direct reports of that manager in the top 10%, their scores are at the 75th percentile. Now, this is really fundamental to what we're saying here. And this is the trickle-down effect. And the better a leader is, the better their direct reports are as managers. Well, the worse a leader is, so it trickles down either way, positive or negative. But you can see the impact of being a bad leader and an excellent leader. And that's the trickle down effect. Jack, would you add anything to that?
No, I think that's just very, very compelling data. So kind of to sum up, what we've said is that clearly leadership development impacts the participant himself or herself. Secondly, it impacts the people who report to them. There is this trickle-down effect. And now I have the great joy to report to you something that I didn't know a year ago. And that is that it doesn't stop there. That the leader's influence apparently radiates, extends, cascades out to other people. And let me tell you why we believe that to be true. This is a case study of an organization with whom we worked over a period of 9 years. It was a financial services firm. They had about 7,000 employees. As you can see down below, on the horizontal axis, we're showing you the years that were involved, the year 2015 to 2017. And during that 3-year period, they had 314 leaders participate. And then in the second period of time, we'll call it in honor of Taylor Swift, the second era was 2018 to 2020. They had about 340 leaders. And then during the years of 2021 through 23, with the pandemic interfering, the numbers fell off a little bit. But you see that they were doing about 100 leaders per year up until this last period. Now, what you're seeing is the incoming 360-degree feedback scores of the participants. And so this was a well-managed company. They began at an above average score. And so in that first 3-year period, the people entering in were scoring at the 56th percentile. But then, interestingly enough, in that second 3-year period, the numbers jumped from the 56th to the 62nd percentile. And then moving over to the final 3-year period, the numbers moved from the 62nd to the 70th. And we would invite you to kind of think with us, what accounts for the fact that before these people have been developed at all, their incoming scores grew by that much. And our only conclusion, we will say, is that somehow in the casual, informal, daily interactions of these leaders with all the people that they work with inside their organization, they saw improved leadership behavior, which they elected to kind of mimic and model themselves after. And so we see this inexorable kind of climb from the 56th to the 70th percentile. And I would say to you that of all the things that has emerged from our research in the last decade, this is the one that's most stunning to me, because we never imagined the extending effect of our work. Now, the next case study I'm going to let Joe talk about. Well, the idea is let me just talk about it. The idea is that the rising tide basically lifts all boats. And one more interesting piece of data that came out of this research that I was just sharing with you was that, and then the next slide, Joe, is we looked at the number of leaders in each of those 3-year periods of time who would have scored in the top 10% of all the leaders that we measure. And so, interestingly enough, in that first 3-year period, there were 6% of the leaders who were in the top 10%. In the next 3-year era, it doubled. And in the final 3-year era, it tripled from the original 6%. So not only were they improving this overall, but the ones who really were outstanding were greatly gaining in numbers over those periods of time.
Yeah, Jack, and this is really what it's saying is those numbers went up because the great leaders, the really good leaders, there were more of them than there were the bad leaders in that trickle down example. And so, that's part of what drove it up, but also just the continued use of the assessment so that, people studied for the final because there was a final, right?
Yeah.
They're expecting that. This is a second study we did at a university. And again, this is a longer period of time. We have 4 kind of eras in this. But you can see at the university, they start off at the 57th percentile. They don't make much progress. They go to the 60th percentile and then the 64th percentile. And this really sort of is really a shout out to people that stay with it. They're not a one and done kind of organization. They said, okay, leadership effectiveness is important. It makes a difference. We are going to help our leaders be better leaders, and we're going to continue to do this. And over time, it has this really positive effect, and it sends some messages to the culture. But also what happens is people get better and they improve, and then you get this trickle up effect of that they're better, so their direct reports are better. I
Well, it's
mean,
certainly a trickle aside and sideways effect. And
yeah,
and you look at this chart and you say, okay, here's an organization that starts out in the year 2009 to 12, a little bit above average, but years later, they're just bumping up against the top quartile. And that clearly has to make a difference in how the organization functions.
it does. It does.
Okay, the third study that we will share with you is a little bit different. This is an IT organization. It has about 3,000 employees in it. It's interesting that as you look at the very first years that we worked with them, they were the years 2007 to 2009. They didn't have a lot of people participate that year, in those years. And then they took a little bit of a hiatus, and then they picked up again in the years 2017, and they carried on pretty steadily from 2017 up through 2024. So what you would observe is that they didn't start out above average. They were below average. And I would observe to you that based on some other research that we've done, it's not unusual for the IT function to have lower scores than marketing or sales or any other functional department in the organization. Now, why is that? Is it because the people in the IT function are very focused on designing complex systems and they're very involved in writing code, and the people interactions are maybe not as important to them? Anyway, we do have data from comparing IT firms to non-IT firms that would confirm this data, that in general, those in the IT function don't score as highly on a 360-degree feedback process as their colleagues. But look at what happened over time. They moved from the 38th to the 43rd, and then you can see what happens until years later, they're now at the 65th percentile. And I would submit to you that this makes an enormous difference in how the organization functions. This 27 percentile gain in improvement is just stunning. And the fact that they involved a significant slice of their leaders over time, used some powerful learning methods. Now, I would add one more thing here. In this particular example, this company did 360s, and they also paired them up with a business simulation. And so these participants in the later years had done both of those kind of in tandem with each other. But we think this is a nice kind of complement to the other studies that we've done that show even though you start out at a lower point, you make significant gains over time.
And Jack, all of these studies just show that the training makes a difference, that you can impact the level of leadership effectiveness, but it can't be a one and done. It's not, if you do it once and forget about it, then you lose everything. But if you continue to do it and emphasize it, it really makes a difference.
So I would reiterate that of all the things that I think our research has uncovered, this may be one of the most important kind of findings, and that is that effective leadership development radiates out and impacts the people around you. Our data shows the enormous benefits of a broad scale leadership development effort. It's predictable and measurable. And if people use powerful learning methods, involve a major slice of the population, and do it over time, it would be remarkable if they didn't have great results. Now, we know that some organizations, either for financial constraints or whatever, elect to have a hypo program where only a limited number of people participate. And we understand if the organization lacks the resources to do a more broad scale initiative, certainly a hypo program is better than nothing. But what's missing when you do the hypo program is this extending effect so that the rising tide lifts all boats. One of the things that Joe and I deeply believe in, what brought us, I think, together was, a new employee joining an organization deserves to work for a really good leader. And we think this opportunity of having a broad scale initiative reaches out and extends to the entire company. Now, finally, I would just observe to all attending our webinar today that any organization can replicate this analysis by using their multi-rater feedback process. Would love it to be our own, but if it's not, by all means, use the data that you have. You can analyze your data over time and see what's happening to the level of effectiveness of your leaders as you sustain this activity over a longer time period. Thanks to all of you for participating in today's webinar. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Maria, and she's going to give you a final kind of message on our behalf. Thanks again, Maria, for manning our chat box. I can see that it was pretty busy.
It was very busy and really great questions. And if we didn't get to it, we will be sure to follow up with you or send additional information that you asked about. So thank you, Joe and Jack, for the valuable insights that you shared today. And what a great webinar. Business results is a question that many in the talent and within the business units gets asked so that they can secure funding and budgets for the next year. So I just encourage everyone as next steps to connect with your Zinger Folkman rep and let them help you with some of these strategies to help you secure executive buy-in for your development plans. And as you look into 2025 and forward, it will be a consultative approach on how to position leadership development as an essential business strategy, and that it does drive tangible results so it can be measured. And as you saw from the case studies, we do have the expertise to tailor our programs and equip you with information that you can present as compelling case studies to the executives you have meetings with. So thank you again. We welcome you to complete the exit survey, and in return for that, you will get a copy of Jack's article, The Proven Importance of Leadership Development, and you can also use the bit.ly link as well.